Do you want to turn a simple open source tool into a powerhouse used by millions, catching Microsoft eyes and revolutionizing workplace automation? In this episode, Peter shares the journey of botKit, an open source framework for Slack, and how it became essential for enterprise workflows. Learn the secrets of organic growth through product excellence, community support, and strategic partnership. Whether you're a developer or an entrepreneur, find out how to leverage open source for explosive growth and impact. Plus, get insights into Peter's latest projects that empowers non-coders with AI-driven automation tools. Unlock the potential of open source as a growth engine and transform your ideas into successful products. Hello, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you. Peter, before we start, do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires, motivates you, you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think about something my grandma said to me when I was a kid, and it is if you meet one annoying person in the day, and I'm paraphrasing, she says something much saltier, but if you meet one annoying person in the day, that's bad luck. And if everywhere you go, you meet annoying people, you might be the annoying person. And so I think about that all the time. Like, am I having a bad day, or is the world mean out to get me? And I think that's kind of like how I balance my main character syndrome.
Yeah, yeah. So, Peter, before we go further, imagine you are in a room full of founders, right? They're sitting there, they're on their phone, and they're waiting for a speaker to arrive on the stage.
Uh,
After a couple of minutes, you enter the room, the stage is yours, the spotlight is on you, the mic is in your hand. What would you tell them about your story that they will stick with us for the rest of the hour?
Um, I think, yeah, and this is the same thing I think of when I go to any kind of function with people who I consider peers or people I want to talk to. But, I tell people take a good look around. And your job today is not to tell people how smart you are or how great ideas you have, but to learn something that one of these other people know that you don't. And I think that is like the way to get ahead. Uh, a lot of my stuff, I've come into rooms not knowing very much, and I just soak it in. And I think the most crucial thing you can do as a founder is be open and receptive to ideas that didn't come from within, because that is what you hydrate your future ideas with.
Perfect. And I couldn't agree more with you on this one because this is something which every single entrepreneur have to understand in 2026, right? So Peter, you have built a tool which is used by millions, right? I would say it would have gone in hundreds, not just tens, right? Um, Talk us through that story. Where did the idea of that tool is? What is the tool is called? Where did the ideas
Sure.
come from? And how did it end up in hands of millions of people?
Yeah. I think my history in tech is like a lot of people in tech who aren't founders all the way, where you are exposed to a lot of different technologies and tool sets and you find your way into things. And so, like, my
Yeah.
very first startup, um, where I got my first product role, uh, was a product called Pando, and Pando was a peer-to-peer file sharing tool, and the technology was acquired, and every single person uses it every day in something called Windows Update. And I think like a lot of the stuff that people build, like you want to be like the name on the box, and you want to build, you want to build the better toaster and the better mousetrap. But a lot of the tooling, like my second startup, is why I'm in the industry I'm in today, which is botKit, which was a framework for making chatbots on Slack. And when Slack was first coming out, it was a way to integrate. And I wasn't Slack. I don't. I would love to have Slack's IPO and exit and all that, but we were a foundational technology for the early work team infrastructure, and we were day one partners with Teams as a result, and we're day one partners with Cisco WebEx as a result. And I think a lot of the opportunities that you make in this business are being useful and being responsive to the needs of different people. And the more universally applicable you are, like high tide will raise all ships. And so I encourage a lot of founders to find not even just a niche, but like a unserved, untapped market where you may not be the unicorn at the head of the pile, but you're the foundational technology and you come along for the ride.
Hmm. Interesting. And if I may, um, is that correct that it got Microsoft attention, and how did it got that, and why were they interested in your product?
I think this came at a time, this was in the 2000s, and this was when CDN pricing was many more times more expensive than it was today. And people had broadband computers and stuff, and you suddenly saw people had the appetite to download data faster than people had the budget to serve it. And so that was like a pain point that was very real material. And we had a technology where you can effectively turn that off. Like you can see day one, you know, and day two result just by putting it in the mix. And that kind of taught me like a lot of solutioning. Sometimes you do like a yada 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 when you pitch something to a product and a customer, and the yada 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 is like we come to your data center for 3 months and write it, and those are great and they're great to have a services contract. But if you want to have like a relationship with a company for years, uh, if you can come to the meeting with the thing you're going to ship and you can ship it the next day, that is such
Mm,
more of uh, a force multiplier of your business and your ability to like, yeah, this is something that's safe and secure and ready to launch, and it all we have to do is your processes to validate that it works for you, and then maybe customize it a little bit. And versus like
mm,
making something bespoke every time you engage with a customer or a client or a partner integration. And that kind of like ship once and then horizontally expand, I think, especially for small, nimble founders, is really essential to grow your business to the point where you don't require any one individual big customer, but they all support each other and raise you up.
mm, mm. Did you rename it something else afterward later in the history, or it was always named exactly same?
Uh, I think like the naming of all my products, except for the ones I'm working on now, were like before my time. Like I'm employee 3, I'm employee 4. Um,
Mm,
the first product was called Pando, which is Latin to spread, which was a great
mm,
idea for a peer-to-peer client. But then we pivoted into the CDN services, and so we became a network product. And
mm,
when we got acquired, our technology got acquired by Microsoft, they changed it and it became part of a brand of a company called Reloaded Games, which was gaming focused. And then
mm,
when I was with Howdy botKit is just such a great word, and I think like my rule for naming stuff is that you got to be able to say it on a conference floor or at a noisy restaurant or a bar or wherever you're talking to people. And I think botKit is a great word, and that was a great naming convention, and people loved it. And it kind of like if you create like a family of branding languages that is like very simple, then you can call things like botKit Studio and botKit Pro and all those things that kind of like, okay, when I read the name of it, I know kind of what it's for. And I think that's also
mm,
like super essential. Like a lot of people like name their products like Quijibo or Fufara, whatever domain they can get, and
mm.
it just kind of sits there and doesn't inspire what you're going to do with it. And there's so many companies right there that like, I don't know what Datadog does. Or I don't know what Snowflake does. I don't even know what I've
Yeah,
never
exactly.
once.
That's why I asked you this question, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it got me interested. Like, what is
yeah,
botKit? Like, where the name came from, and
yeah.
So tell our listeners more about what botKit was, and
Sure.
why did you choose to keep it open source, and what's the ideal customer persona, and what's the use case for it?
Well, I think botKit was one. It was designed to be open source from the start because um, I think any tooling that is designed for the enterprise has to start open source because people need to be able to independently review the code and just from a security compliance standpoint, understand how it works. And
Mm,
especially in a communication product like Slack, where um, it's hard enough to get people to agree to use Slack in an organization. And then you'll
mm,
have all these edges like, okay, well, we're going to integrate it with our services that use Python, and over here we're going to integrate with our services that use C Sharp, and you get all these like technical hurdles that are entirely organization driven, bifurcation. And open source kind of gives you a open lexicon where everyone can talk about things together, because conversational AI and most AI products are um, all encompassing across the org chart. It's not a technical process. It's not a people process. It is a blend of everything, right? And so you need to have something where stakeholders are able to, the person who picks up the phone is as important as the person who writes the code, is the person
Yeah.
who cuts the checks. And they all have
Yeah.
to weigh in on this thing because it's how they work and it reflects the culture and the ethics of the company who make it. And so
Mm,
botKit quickly became it went from a coding platform into like a discussion platform, kind of like how Figma is, where, okay, here's the
mm,
artifact we're going to talk about our identity, and what we're trying to say and what we're trying to do. And I think that's what led to a lot of success because it was so unopinionated in the way that like a blank Word document is, or Figma is, that
mm.
people were able to do many, many different things.
Yeah.
And I tell people in my consultancy, like, what verticals do you serve? I'm like, mostly computers, right? Because
Mm,
like any industry that is digital technology based uh, is in my purview because it's all just a communication method.
mm. What was the tell me, like, the best use case for that product? Like, what was the wow factor?
I think a lot of stuff you do in work is performative. And I don't mean
Mm,
that as a diss, but like, the daily stand up or like
mm,
reports or things like that. And Slack turned the rhythm of business into kind of a social game. And this was before the pandemic where people were still working offices and stuff, but
yeah.
we're starting to get more and more distributed. And I'm working with developers in Bangalore and I'm talking to clients in London, and we need something that is like in the moment, but better, less mentally challenging than an inbox full of email. And so being able to go
Mm,
into a chat room of the project and say, hey, what's the status of blah? Was great. But then became overloaded with all the pings and notifications. So now we need to make little robots that I could push a button and find out the status of a ticket, or I can update a ticket. And that's just kind of like our evolving understanding of, now that we're in agents, we want to have like a button that sends an email, or a button that auto replies or acknowledges something. So yes, I've seen it. I don't need to reply a big long letter to mom that what I thought about it, but I acknowledge
mm,
it and I approve it. And so these kind of things are like, you know, I think we're seeing people are starting to reevaluate processes and how we do things. And so, we don't have to have a meeting to talk about an email, and maybe we don't have to have a Slack channel to talk about the meeting, about the email we had. We could just like
mm,
have an agent propose a thing and send it out, and everyone agrees to it asynchronously, and we don't have to have a talk about it. So I think a lot of things at work are being arbitrated via these technologies without like the burden of performative work sharing. And
yeah.
you know,
So
I yeah,
it was a bot on top of Slack then,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it was things.
Yeah. And so like we were the number one bot because we were the only bot in the App Store, and we had a bot called Howdy, and all it did was ask the three questions of, what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today, what are your blockers? And it's so
Mm,
like primitive when you think about like all the things that are in Jira and all this stuff today, but back then it was very helpful. I mean, we had so many different customers. We had the Republicans and we had the Democrat National Party, and we had all these like the Grammys, and all these people like use this product, and they made it fun, and they would send us screenshots of the chat of people like celebrating and like talking about their wins, and all being distributed teams. Like they don't have to like if you have a move with the sun development plan, you don't have to find the time, 8 o'clock Pacific time, that everyone can meet. That's painful for everyone. We could just send out the form and people respond to it, and it's less frictive than filling out a spreadsheet or updating a
sure,
ticket or
sure.
whatever. And
Well, how many
sorry,
people do you think it started using? Do you have any
I,
number right now in
I
your?
I think I think at the peak we probably had 150,000 plus teams, and some of the teams
mm,
were as big as, 300-400 people teams. So, close to 1 million people doing daily stand-ups a day with this product. Um,
mm,
and the thing was, like, we also gave you the recipe for it in the form of botKit. So anything you could do in Howdy was really just the showcase for what you could do with botKit. And
mm,
we even had examples from the botKit code, the Howdy code in our repo, and people did that. They had like, well, this is so simple and easy to make a bot that does a stand up. What else can I make? And so people started doing
mm,
things like, here's a bot that turns on the lights at 8 o'clock when I come in the office. And here's a bot that sends out the lunch schedule. And people can pick what
mm.
food they want for the catering. And it's becoming more and more sophisticated as people became more and more adept at it. And so now a lot of these things, like, this is why Salesforce bought Slack, because they are in the business of making tiny little workplace automations, and Slack was the skeleton, the spine of which you can wire that stuff into. And I think a lot of stuff we see at work now is like, trying to automate repeatable processes using technology.
How did you manage to spread the word? Because there are a lot of people who work on open source project. It's not
Mm.
like it's something reserved or small in numbers. What was the way it got so viral?
We were one of the first Slack fund companies, so that definitely helped. Like
Mm,
applying for fellowships and incubators and stuff like that are very helpful because you get to be on stage next to other people. And uh, if I put out a press release, it'll land differently than I and Slack and Google and Microsoft and Twilio put out a press release. And those opportunities are really good. I think the risk for founders are that sometimes you're treated like a services company, and so you also have
mm,
to like know your place and your vision. I think, like, for us, I think, and the reason I think we ended up getting acquired by Microsoft was our experience with Teams launch was very good because they had their SDK and we had our SDK, and they understood what we were for. And so they didn't make us do any more than we have to. And they supplied us all the stuff that they wanted. And so when the launch happened, it was very slick and smooth. And then other
mm,
platforms, it was harder because they wanted what Slack had, but they didn't understand what Slack made. And so,
mm.
that was also kind of like, sometimes success is uh, uh, a curse than a blessing because they like get a naive impression of like the work and the partnerships and stuff. So I
So
think that is also a big part of it.
why why you didn't, like, I understand why you did the make it open source, which is fair in my opinion. Um, but a lot of open source project, they have these kind of like revenue models where they either host it for you and then they make money,
Yep.
or if they have a standalone tool, then they have like some premium features, which is like custom features, things like that. What, why did you manage to get um, a feature like that, or
Mm.
were there any other revenue models for you?
Yeah, yeah.
How did you make money?
Well, it's funny stories. Our acquisition offer came on the day that we were actually going to shut the company down.
Wow.
And the reason we were shutting it down is because we pursued a couple of models of like SaaS hosting of the services, and um, uh, like, we wanted to have like a Patreon like model, where we get money from these companies, like Google had us be the official integration for Slack for dialog flow for the first 5 years of its existence. And they said, go use botKit, and they just had a link to us, and they would make these like $1 million videos of like, go to botKit, and we never saw a dime from them, right?
Mm,
And so I think that is also the challenge of open source, right? Because they all use it, and a big Fortune 500 company doesn't have to give you any money if that's
yeah.
what your license provides. Um, so the Microsoft acquisition was really a lifeline in that regard. And I think the reason they did so is because they understood the importance of open source as a driver of pushing Azure and their other business models. So I think a
Mm,
lot of the stuff is like a lot of startups, like, you want to become a MMR machine that prints out subscriptions. And it's kind of like we were such a basic building block of how to build these things that uh, we would have to build something that looked a lot like VS Code. or something that looked a lot like teams that have 140 people working on it, and we were 5 people. And I think that's kind of like a death trap of like, I don't need to have a IDE for botKit because it's open source code, and you can run it in VS Code or JetBrains or whatever you want. And even Microsoft tried to replicate this. They ported our product botKit Studio into the Bot Composer, and they ran into that problem too. It's like, well, why is this not a VS Code plugin? Or why is this? So I think there's a lot of like people kind of do that dot dot dot, like, oh yes, we need to have Figma, and it's just like people don't really like Figma. They rather just draw on a program and code in another program and find that they should just talk right to each other. So um, I guess this is kind of a long way of saying like the open source was a blessing and the curse because we had millions of signups, and we had a sign up for the studio, which was like a free trial. And so we knew like these bots were being used at scale in big companies, and they there was no interest in like uh, paying a revenue tax because the bar to acquisition was so low that they kind of just like, I already have the cow. Why should I pay for the milk, right? So.
Mm. How would you be able to share how much you got acquired by Microsoft? Or
I think it's public. I have to look. It's been a long time. But yeah, you could probably Google it. Yeah, I don't think Microsoft really announces their deals, so I don't know. But
in
uh,
six figures, let's say.
yeah, more than yeah, in the six up. So
Yeah.
and and I think the acquisition is also like a thing like there was roles at the new company and all that stuff too that are also part of it. And as a company, do you want to be a serial entrepreneur or do you want to like work on your technology without worrying about fundraising and going out there and hiring people and having the resources? Like we no longer had to worry about sales. We no longer had to worry about, we could just build cool products and cool code. And that's also part of the price acquisition, I think, especially like if you're not looking to exit from the industry that you started. So,
Yeah, that's true. Um, what would you advise for somebody, let's say 22 years old Peter Swimm, right? Just got
mm.
out of the college. And the young Peter want to start an open source project. What would you advise this young Peter what you would have done differently when you started KidBot, just so that our listeners can learn?
I would say don't discount the amount of community support you have to put out there once you make it, because I think a lot of the time that we had probably could have spent building our business, we would spend in the community, merging pull requests and talking to people and explaining how things work and being helpful. And I think that is often really unbudgeted, and you kind of like put it on your team to like, oh, I'm going to check the GitHub at 9 o'clock at night and stuff like that. And that's a job, that's a business, and
Yeah.
that takes a lot of time and dedication. Like at the time of the peak of our success, GitHub listed us as one of the top 10 new repos for people starting out at programming. And that's incredible because I would answer questions. I realized this person doesn't know what JavaScript is. Like they've never programmed in their life, and we made it where they got pretty far into the process without having to know all that stuff. And that's like, it is a responsibility to a community of like, oh, we need, I know a lot of people who are now 15, 20 years in tech because botKit approved their first PR ever. And that's like incredible. Like that's an incredible responsibility, and it's very important. And so like I would
What is
tell
it?
not to discount it. Yeah,
Yeah, no, what I want to understand is, our show is all about founders, entrepreneurship,
sure.
and everything, right? And product-led growth is some of the best growths you could achieve in your entrepreneurship journey, right? And you're
That's
the
right.
live example of it, right? You created an open source product, and it was grown because of the product, not because you were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for marketing, or spending tens and hundreds of hours doing,
Yeah.
SEO, or you had a big client upfront when you were working. Everything what your expertise lies in is basically developing great product, right? So product led growth was something which you cashed on. what I mean by catching on is getting more eyeballs, not like cash cow,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so what I want to understand, or what I would like you to communicate to our listeners is, yes, you got an idea to work upon. It is solving a pain point, and yes, as you suggested, as you advised, don't underestimate the amount of support you have to provide, or not overestimate it also, because your community will provide the support depending on what kind of product you have. But what else one could do about an open source project to make sure that it becomes successful, other than the product itself is great?
Um, I think there's a lot of stuff you can do, and it really comes to like building the same things you do when you build a community, right? There has to be organization and hierarchy, and you have to be supportive of all kinds of different kinds of people, and you need to have the energy and the time to be a good steward. Like it's
Mm.
just like running a restaurant or a bar that's like a neighborhood community. So, and I think a lot of communities kind of implode because they're also not ready for the success of what is like we had our Slack had 20,000 people in it. It was a free open source Slack. And what does
Mm.
20,000 people moderation look like on a day-to-day basis when it's not your main job? Is like hard.
Mm.
Like we had to keep spammers out, and we had to keep out hucksters and people who were trying to like, self promote and also make it a good place to find answers and be a useful tool to the community. And that's a full time job. And I have three other full time jobs on my plate as a product owner. And
Yeah.
so I think you also have to like prepare the mental capacity budget for things like that, of like
Mm.
make sure that you have the energy at the end of the day to look at the PRs, because if it starts, it's like broken windows in a building. It's like starts to look run down. People treat it worse, and people get hurt. And if a person has a bad experience in an open source community, maybe they leave the industry. Maybe they like don't come. Maybe it's like tech is not for me, and that is a huge like obligation of like, oh, I have the opportunity to give someone a good first impression on a career that could change their life. And so that is kind of like what goes into when you make open source. And if you're a founder and you're like, I just want to make money, it's like, you might not want to do open source then, right? Because it, there's a lot of social impact and there's a lot of social implications when you do something like that.
Sure, sure. Um, so I usually advise the listeners on the show to, if they're working on something and they want to, get more eyeballs on it, they can create communities on Reddit, they can post on Reddit, they can go on Facebook groups, they can do a lot of articles like, SEO optimization for their product and website and everything. Any other places you would advise specifically for open source projects, where they could go and spread the word and get more
Um,
eyeballs?
pay attention to your Slack overflow. Like make sure like I had a Google alert set up for all the coding communities, and it's like a lot of people will inherit your code base. Like they'll build the POC and then leave the company, and then someone will be like, "How does botKit work? And how does this work?" And they're looking at a version of your product that may be 10 years old. Uh, you know, Give them a little breadcrumb to find the updated doc, and make sure you have that information out there. Pay attention to what people are saying about you on the Twitters and the Facebook and all that, and be omnipresent. Make sure that you're driving the narrative of like what your product is about and what you're doing and all that, and be responsive. If people are uh, bad mouthing your product, maybe there's a gap, maybe there's a
Mhm.
process error, and that's like free research. Like people like pay for that kind of insight of like being bad mouth on social media or being touted on social media. So you really do need to kind of like leverage all that as much as you can.
Mm. Did you had a lot of people, a lot of advocates writing and talking about Kitbot, or how did? Because I'm guessing if a lot of people are using it, and you're saying there are 20,000 people on your open source Slack,
Yeah,
those people need to know about you somewhere. And I'm guessing because you were first on open source on Slack,
yeah,
primarily you were getting a lot of traction from Slack itself,
right.
um, which is a very good way to get inside the doors.
Yeah, yeah. Well, also like a lot of people, because we're open source technology, when a big partner launches a product, they don't say, Oh yeah, we built it on Redis. It's like
Mm,
we're very happy to announce that we're using React 10. Like no one does that, right? So like sometimes you have to like steal their thunder when they do their press releases and say built with botKit, just like a
mm,
retweet, and then that kind of thing like resonates, and they see you under all these posts like, oh, another thing's built with botKit, and so there's a
mm,
little bit of like virality that happens. So if you help like big people do cool things, it's nice if they bring you on stage with them when they announce it, but you should also like leverage every single bit of free press you can get, right? And
yeah.
like say, and do it and kind of like as a proud parent would, like I'm so happy of my friends at Walmart for shipping this product with botKit. It's
Mm,
very easy. Click here to find out how you can. Like you can
mm.
turn all kinds of things and opportunities for a campaign for yourself. So.
Awesome. Great stuff. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the deal then. Was there any negotiation, or it just because you were closing down, Microsoft came out, we will give you this much, and you took it, or was there any kind of like
There,
leverage you had?
there was a conversation. I'm leaning. You can always say no, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like if you had the plan shut down, then you had the plan to be what it was going to be, and we would just do something else. And I think that's the other thing. Is like we didn't discover gold. We had a team of creative people. Ben Brown was our CTO, and he's full of ideas, and all my people that have worked on there have done very successful things since. And I think if you're confident in yourself and your ideas, there's no way to really lose in a negotiation. It's just like buying a car. You're just like, oh,
Mm,
I'll come back some other day. And then, wait, come back. Like, and so I think like even we weren't in a position of strength as you would have been if we were like unicorn successful, right? Like if we had millions of dollars of MMR and all that. Of course, the negotiations have been clearly different, but also like we're thoughtful, smart human beings, and we're not starving, and we can walk away. And so I think that kind of like comes down to the heart of it. Is like if you failed, what else would you do, right? And maybe it's keep on doing the company, um,
mm,
like. But there's all kinds of outcomes. Like I can find other jobs. I don't mind. If I shut down a company, I'll start another company. It's not
yeah.
like the end of the world. And I think like if you build your company like that, where it isn't the end of the world if you fail, then because my first company that I worked at, Pando, we were three pivots into the idea before we found something that made money. And so like
Mm,
maybe the pivot is a completely different product in a completely different industry. Like Slack itself is a pivot, right? Because they wanted to make a video game, and the tool they
yeah.
made to manage making the video game became the thing. And so
Yeah.
like you have to be open to any kind of like opportunity like that.
Indeed. Indeed. Great. So before we move to our quick fire round, then I wanted to ask you, like, what's the what's the best way uh, for you to understand? Like, you said that you are working on something new, right? What is it
Mm.
you're working on? What's the idea? What's the product, and who's it for?
Sure, sure. So right now, our company Toyville, we do a lot of consulting for people about automation, and I think right now automation tools are fundamentally broken. And internally, we built a stack that is both using AI and not to kind of determine what are the repeatable success stories and when you make a product. Because the one thing the AI coding thing has done for the industry that's a net positive, I think, is the ability to build a POC in a day, right?
Mm,
So when you build something, it's materially different than when you think about something because you could see how it works and you can use it in an experimental way, and it's very low cost of entry to like find out that it's a bad idea or not. And so I think this kind of tooling could be very simple and brought to the average user who's not a computer programmer and be able to figure out things because a lot of times our clients are very very strong in their domain expertise. I talk to lawyers and doctors and uh, heads of contact centers and people who know stuff and they've known it for 30 years and they're very smart and they don't know Python and JavaScript and all those
mm,
tooling. And I tell them that you are more essential to this project than me because you know where all the bodies are buried in your line of business. And so, how do we empower those people? And so, the tool we're making at Toyville, it's called Rituals because you come into work and it's a day of work and it's a ritual. And how do you take you're sitting at your desk all day and you're talking to a microphone. You're like, make me a report, right? Or do this or do that, whatever the task is. And there's processes that are rote you do every day, and that's a computer program. And then there's something new, then you have to like build it. So how do you make it where you don't have like 8,000 programs bespoke every time? Is you make real software. And so that's the kind of tooling that we're thinking about. We use it internally all the time. I can take an SOW and I can bring a proof of concept to the first meeting. And then the second meeting, we can give them something they could ship. And I think that kind of barrier to entry where the POC is actually V1, right? And then the thing you launch with is maybe V2, right? You get it. And so instead of shipping more code, we ship more developed V1s. And I think that is kind of the opportunity for AI is not slop, but like I'm going to
Mm,
ship code that's completely safe and compliant and works with screen readers and all that stuff that gets cut from V1s all the time because you don't have time or budget to do it. And so I think that will make better. We can make better V1s. We don't need to make more V2s and threes and fours. We just have to make everything that much more improved. So that's the kind of tooling we're working on, and we hope to have something in beta this summer for the public.
indeed. Indeed. Great stuff. So let's move on to our lightning round then. I've got 6 quick fire questions for you. At any stage, if you feel you don't want to answer one of them, just give me a skip and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay. All
Uh,
right.
Question number 1. What are the top 3 strategies to work and produce more traction for your open source project in 2026?
I think one is understand that everyone is a different kind of learner. And so what that means is you have to have a good README, but you also have to have a good video explainer, and you also have to have a good website. Like if I come to your website and if I can't tell in 5 seconds what you're trying to solve, there's a problem,
Mm,
right? And if I watch your video and I can't tell in the first 30 seconds what the video is going to show me how to do, I go to the next video. And the README has to be the same too. You got to be able to skim it and get to your answer
mm,
quickly. And this is easier now. You can have your AI agent read it, but like people like to read and everyone's can be different. So you have to be a good teacher first and making your information available. So that's all one. So become a good teacher. And second is become a therapist. So people are going to tell you all kinds of problems you feel like have nothing to do with your open source framework, but
mm,
they've come to you because they maybe paint themselves in a corner of a bunch of tools and like Slack requires me to do this and the API we're using requires me to do this and how do I do this in you? And so now you have to learn how Slack works and the API works and solve all that. And maybe there's Occam's razor where you do it before it goes into things and then send those out. And so a lot of the
mm,
tooling I do is like a lot of my clients end up like getting rid of 30% of their subscriptions because they instead of making something complicated orchestrating things, you just go back to the source and make it right from the get-go. Um, and I guess the third thing is like be open, like take criticism to heart and realize you can't be everything to all people. Like there's gonna be someone who's just like, oh, you're a JavaScript framework, I can't use you. Okay, like you know sometimes decisions become like culture wars where it's just like, are
mm.
you Nintendo or are you
Xbox
Xbox?
or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And it's just like, like I don't, I'm Unity. I want to be everywhere. I don't have a platform in the race unless Nintendo wants to buy me, then sure, I'll be Nintendo exclusive. And I think like
Mm,
that kind of like openness, but also like non-partisanship is like super it's almost like a diplomacy where
sure.
like I worked with Walmart and uh the first question they would ask any vendor or partner or anything is like, where's your cloud? And if the answer is AWS, the conversation ended
Mm,
because they refuse to use anything Amazon services, even if it was like via vis-a-vis, like it was a non-starter. And so like that's not your problem as a startup. You shouldn't, because Walmart executives have such hatred for Amazon that they won't work with them. You should be in a position like, okay, we'll spin up something in Google Cloud for you. Like you should be
mm,
flexible and nimble and be like, okay, yeah, we'll give this opportunity will pay for itself in the dedicated Google infrastructure. or not, and then
Mm,
you tell them to kick rocks. So
got it. Got it. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
um, I read this really fascinating book recently that's from the 90s, and this blogger called Joel on Software wrote a book about PMing at Microsoft in the 90s. And it's so interesting because the 90s were a materially different time to make software, and yet they have all the same problems. You have all, about capacity and sprint planning and all that. And I find like reading old books very fascinating because they always say within 5 years, people are going to do this. And here we are 20 years later and it still hasn't happened. And so, yeah, read that, find that, I forget the name of it. Joel on Software wrote the book, and I picked it up at a dollar sale, at some book sale. And I always find it more interesting to read like fake or unproven predictions of the future from the past and current predictions of
Mhm.
the future from now, because you'll see that people did the same thing over and over again. Like in the 70s, when chatbots first came out, people wrote all the stuff they're writing about AI today. And so
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
can go back there and read different perspectives of, okay, we thought AI was coming in the 80s and we thought it was coming in the 2000s, and what do they think then that's still true? So I think, that's always a good reading tip for me. It's go find a
Sure.
99-cent book at the book sale. That is.
Sure. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
I think confidence in yourself without
Mm,
uh, losing empathy and understanding of others. Like I I'm in my 40s, and I think I'm at the stage now where I know which of my ideas are fundamental and don't change, and I know which my ideas are open to change and fluid and dependent on the situation I work in. And that just
mm,
takes experience of like, okay, here's my non-negotiable ethical things I won't do, and here's the things that I am empathetic to why you would do it, but I'm
sure.
opposed to you doing it, and here's the reasons why
Sure.
you should do it, and here's like the things
Sure.
I you can't do and you shouldn't do, and if you want to do, I don't want to work with you, and
Sure.
that's hard. It's hard to walk away from a sure thing if the person is doing things that are contrary to things you believe in.
Yeah. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I
Don't
The
say
one thing,
Kinbot.
no, no, no. Uh, you know, the I am really obsessed lately with making list. I'm super into like list making of like taxonomies and things like that. I find it very relaxing, like doing the crossword puzzle. And so like
Mm,
part of the tool that we're making now is it's kind of a Rosetta Stone for APIs. And so I take like 4 APIs and I just categorize it into what a Uber API would look like. And it's just like it's
mm,
fun. It's kind of like when you remember back in grade school when you do like sentence diagramming, like here's the noun and the pronoun and the verb and how they work together. And that kind of like is a good way to look at your processes, I think, of like, okay, I get an email and I copy the email into Salesforce and I type up the thing, and you're like, wow, look at all these jumps I'm doing. Like, how do I like cut out
yeah,
this big section and all that? And I think that is like very relaxing to do versus like going on podcasts and answering emails and stuff.
sure. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Hmm. I feel like there's many people in the world that have incredible business acuity, like your uncle with the corner store and your cousin who does the swap meets and the hustle culture that don't have access to things like stock trading and like
Mm,
and where are the AI assistants for people like that who have intuition about the art of the deal and how you turn it into something that's legible and legal and as effective as the Bear Stearns of the world. I would love to see kind of like an Uber for Bear Stearns.
sure. Sure. Last but not least, what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
I'm on IMDb. Uh,
Interesting.
I, I
Which film? Which web
I was
series?
I was in a documentary about uh, chiptune, which is video game music made with video game systems, but performed in huge concert halls. And so when I was in New York City, my uh, side project was I organized this huge festival with a bunch of people, and so there's a documentary about it. So yeah, look me up on
Mm,
IMDb.
perfect. I'm going to do that. Peter, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story and back in last years and building this business and some of the ups and downs. If people want to get in touch with you, people want to ask you questions, what's the best way to do it?
You can reach my consultancy Toyville at peoplemakeitbetter.com.
That's pretty straightforward and fair enough. Great, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing through your services and product. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ash.